War is everywhere. Faced with certain doom, elves, men, and dwarves have united their forces to form an alliance of order. This is the dawn of a new age, an age where the fate of nations will be forged in the fires of war. This is the age of reckoning.
The year is 2008. World of Warcraft has firmly brought the once niche MMORPG genre into the mainstream. News channels are making documentaries about how it's destroying the youth. People are selling their bodies for gold to buy flying mount training, and Warhammer says, I gotta get in on that. The MMO part, not the prostitution for in-game currencies part. Warhammer Fantasy was created by Games Workshop in 1983 and is thought by many to be one of the most, if not the most, influential tabletop miniature games of all time. The universe features high fantasy races and lore imbued with a dark and gritty tone where the world is constantly teetering on the edge of apocalyptic chaos. It's the sense of war and destruction in this fantasy setting that has made the IP wildly appealing, and considering Blizzard's success within the MMO genre, it was only inevitable that Warhammer would try their hand. However, Climax Studios, the first studio to try making this adaptation, stumbled, having issues with scaling their vision and integrating the sheer amount of lore into an online framework, leading to its eventual cancellation. When Mythic Entertainment took over, however, they inherited not just the Warhammer IP, but also the high expectations from its fans. But this time, they had experience under their belt, having developed the Dark Age of Camelot, which had successfully merged PvE with its RVR system. Mythic was seen as the perfect studio to bring Warhammer's brutal, war-torn world to life. In a time where the MMO genre had gained newfound popularity, people's expectations were soaring into the heavens. Releasing in 2008 with a stellar launch of 1.2 million sales, many thought that, much like World of Warcraft, their MMO release was to be their crown jewel. But, as it would turn out, these numbers would only slowly dwindle until its eventual demise in 2013. Today, we're going to analyze the rise and fall of Warhammer Online, the Age of Reckoning. Mythic Entertainment was founded in 1995 by Mark Jacobs and Rob Denton as Interworld Productions. Initially, the company focused on creating multi-user dungeons, or mods, which were the text-based predecessors to the MMORPGs. And in 1997, the company rebranded itself to Mythic Entertainment. They would release several titles during this time, but their most defining moment came in 2001 with the release of The Dark Age of Camelot, an MMO inspired by European mythology and featuring a 3-realm system, offering a unique take on player versus player combat. It would be well received both by critics and players, particularly for its innovative mass combat realm versus realm, or RVR system. More importantly, its success would put Mythic Entertainment on the map as a major player in the MMORPG space, and it would often be compared to other popular MMOs such as EverQuest or Ultima Online. It would eventually peak at over 250,000 subscribers at its height, which was quite a lot at the time. So when it was learned that they were tasked with bringing in such a huge IP into the genre, there was much excitement. Almost as much excitement that you'll get by becoming a pro coder by using the learning tool, boot.dev. Much like life itself, learning back-end development can sometimes feel like an endless grind, and as much as the world first 300 fisherman, world first Bloodcell Admiral, rank 14 monotonous Adonis loves that, what if I were to tell you that there's a way to make it as fun and as engaging as a video game? With boot.dev, you can learn back-end web development in Python and Go while feeling like you're leveling up in an RPG. It's designed to keep you engaged using learning techniques from game design, You're not just reading theory, you're actually writing code from day one and solving challenges, shipping projects, plus it's self-paced so you can learn when it suits you. As you complete challenges, you learn XP, levels, achievements, all while preparing for a real-world career in back-end development. And if you ever get stuck, their AI guide, Boots, is there to walk you through any tricky concepts and asking you questions to deepen your understanding. And there's also an active Discord community there as well to help you out. Boot.dev really focuses on fundamentals and helping you build solid skills for your tech career. And according to Stack Overflow, back-end developers in the US earn a median salary of over $100,000 a year. So you can pay as much money as you want to not play your favorite game. If you're interested, click the link in the description and use my code to get 25% off your first month or even your entire first year if you go for the annual plan. Anyways, in 2006, during its development, they would be acquired by Electronic Arts as part of a move to strengthen their presence within the MMO market. And though this would bring many benefits, the biggest being funding for the project, it was accompanied by a looming shadow of destructive corporate influence, as EA at this point had been responsible for the acquisition and liquidation of many such game studios. Regardless, the pieces were in play, and development continued. The bones of the game would be standard of most MMOs in this mid-2000s era, featuring a diverse array of character classes, each designed to fit within the broader context of Warhammer fantasy. Each were divided amongst their own racial lines, with each race having distinct classes that reflected their role within the Warhammer lore. For instance, the Empire and the Empire only could have classes like Witch Hunter and Bright Wizard, while the Greenskins featured classes like the Black Orc or the Squig Herder. Each of these pairings had melee and ranged DPS classes, tank, healing, or support that mimicked each other's roles, but yet still had variations in playstyle, aesthetics, and also lore. It was designed to maintain symmetry between the two factions, ensuring that every class had some sort of a counterpart on the opposite side, in order to maintain some measure of balance, but at the same time adding variety and uniqueness. They would also, of course, rely heavily upon one of their greatest strengths, an IP with decades of lore and history under its belt. The game's environments, character designs, storylines were all heavily inspired by Games Workshop's iconic tabletop universe, providing players with an authentic Warhammer experience. Similar in a lot of ways to World of Warcraft, each race had their own unique starting zone, which reflected the aesthetics and culture of that race. The Empire's starting zone was a grim and war-torn landscape filled with crumbling castles and corrupt villages and chaos invaders, while in contrast, the Greenskins starting area was a barren wasteland where orc warbands clashed with dwarven armies in an eternal struggle for dominance. These environments were rich in detail and provided a sense of immersion that made players feel like they were part of this ongoing war. Many of the quests were inspired by famous battles or events from the IP's history. Players could participate in quests that pitted them against iconic enemies such as the Skaven or the Chaos Gods, while the game's main storyline focused on the eternal struggle between the Order and Destruction, with each faction vying for control of the world. And though World of Warcraft had become wildly popular at the time, when Mythic took over development, they knew that competing with it required a distinct vision. Rather than attempt a straight replica of World of Warcraft's blend of PvE and PvP combat, they wanted to create a game that instead emphasized large-scale warfare, which they believed was truer to the Warhammer universe. To this end, one of the game's primary selling points, much like the Dark Age of Camelot, became its realm vs. realm combat, which was a system where players could engage in large-scale PvP battles to capture territory for their faction, complete with its own progression system. The developers wanted the players to feel like they were part of this epic ongoing war that extended beyond individual battles and quests. It was framed as an integral part of the game's storyline, with the ultimate goal being the sacking of enemy capitals, which would be possible if a faction dominated enough zones. Drawing inspiration from DAOC, it divided the game world into 3 conflict zones, one for each race: Empire versus Chaos, High Elves versus Dark Elves, and Dwarves versus Greenskins. In each zone, players would engage in battles to control strategic points, with victories contributing to the overall war effort, and as one faction gained dominance in multiple zones, they could eventually lay siege to the enemy's capital city, and the sieges themselves were monumental events involving dozens or even hundreds of players on each side. Defenders had to repel waves of attackers, protecting key structures and NPCs, while attackers aimed to break through city defenses and reach the final bosses. In theory, it would create a deeply engaging, large-scale PvP environment. It would foster a sense of teamwork, where the whole server was encouraged to band together in defense or offense against enemy factions. But theory is one thing. Creating such a system was fraught with challenges, particularly in balancing ambition with accessibility. Games like World of Warcraft at this point catered to casual gamers, and Mythic had to decide how much to cater to the hardcore PvP audience, while also ensuring that the more casual players felt included. But for now, exactly how they would do that would remain to be a mystery. Nonetheless, this RVR system would become their crown jewel, and they had seemed to stake their entire game on it. Another innovative feature that set it apart from other MMOs at the time was the public quest system, which allowed players to engage in these large open-world events without needing to form groups. They had multiple stages, each building in difficulty, and often culminating in a climactic battle or boss fight. For example, the first stage might require players to kill a number of weaker enemies, and the second maybe would be a mini-boss or protecting another NPC, whereas the final stage would be this very large-scale boss fight that required coordination from all participants. And at the end, loot rewards were distributed based on each player's contribution to the quest. The system was quite unique at the time, and it would promote a cooperative experience while reducing the need for solo grinding or questing, and creating a dynamic and social PvE experience. Another key innovation was the Tome of Knowledge, which was an in-game encyclopedia of sorts that tracked the player's progress and achievements, while also serving as a lore compendium. It offered a unique mix of storytelling and gameplay, and rewarding players for exploring the world and completing hidden objectives. Players who delved deep into the tome could unlock cosmetic rewards and titles, and additional lore snippets, adding depth to the world. Though it may seem pretty run-of-the-mill by today's standards, this would be one of the first achievement-based systems to be released within the genre. Despite these innovations, Warhammer could not escape comparisons to World of Warcraft. Released 4 years after Blizzard's hit, it was often labeled to be the WoW killer, even though Mythic and EA distanced themselves from such claims. However, the comparisons were inevitable, given that both games had a high fantasy setting with similar core mechanics such as questing, leveling, and faction-based PvP. But the differences were significant. While World of Warcraft excelled in offering a balanced blend of PvE and PvP, Warhammer more leaned heavily into the PvP content, particularly with its RVR system. As with any MMO project, Warhammer's development encountered numerous challenges and delays. Initially slated for release in 2007, the game faced several pushbacks due to various technical and design hurdles. One of the biggest obstacles was the complexity of the RVR system. Balancing large-scale PvP with compelling PvE content proved to be more difficult than the developers anticipated, as this massively complex RVR system dominated most of their focus. Additionally, the team struggled with server stability and technical issues during testing phases. These massive battles, which were meant to be the hallmark of the game, caused significant lag and issues, leading to performance problems that would haunt the game even post-launch. I'm trying to pin down exactly what made World of Warcraft so popular. Some will mention its casual-friendly nature, others its endgame systems, some simply timing, but what's often overlooked are the basics. The gameplay felt smooth, natural, and fun. When you pressed the button, an ability came out, and it simply felt good. This was the result of a lot of polish over a 5-year development cycle that Warhammer simply lacked. Even on high-end systems, it felt clunky and unnatural, and it was something that was immediately noticeable to anybody coming from the world of Azeroth. Though it had more than enough innovation, what it lacked was this foundation for which the players got to experience it. It also suffered major balance issues. Although the classes were mirrored in archetype, they still varied and held unique gameplay styles, and while this would be advantageous in providing variety between the two factions as well as identity, it would also create balance issues where some mirror classes were vastly superior to the opposite faction's counterpart. Despite these setbacks, release day drew closer and closer, and facing pressure from their publisher, EA, the development team made their final push to release a game that, at the very least, is playable, if not hamstrung. After a 3-year development cycle, Warhammer Online, The Age of Reckoning, finally launched in September of 2008, to great anticipation and expectations soaring into the heavens. EA and Mythic spared no expense in their marketing campaign, which highlighted the game's key selling points: massive PvP battles, immersive lore, and a focus on faction-based warfare. The tagline, "War is everywhere," encapsulated the game's emphasis on conflict and RVR combat. This marketing campaign played heavily on the Warhammer IP, drawing in not just MMO fans, but also die-hard Warhammer fans who had long awaited a faithful video game adaptation of the beloved tabletop universe. Trailers showcased epic battles between armies of order and destruction, and promotional materials emphasized the game's focus on war and conquest and grittiness. Initial reviews were generally positive. Many praised the game's innovative public quest system, which was a breath of fresh air at the time, as well as its RVR mechanics and the faithful recreation of the Warhammer fantasy world and strong visual design in particular, which stood out against the more cartoony aesthetic of World of Warcraft. Because of this and the general hype, the early months saw over 800,000 players registering accounts, with more than 500,000 subscriptions by the end of 2008, a respectable figure for a new MMO in a post-WoW landscape. They would not hold these figures for long, however, as their main hook, RVR, continued to face issues post-launch. Balancing the two factions proved to be quite difficult, and one would commonly significantly outnumber the other, leaving the undermanned demoralized by their constant defeats. On some servers, this imbalance was so severe that it caused mass exoduses of players, further exacerbating the population issues and leading to frequent complaints about uneven battles as Mythic struggled to address it in meaningful ways. As for city sieges, they would prove to be one of the most technically challenging aspects of the game, as the performance issues weren't addressed in time for release. The large number of players involved still led to significant server lag and performance issues, especially during peak hours. The technical limitations of the game's engine struggled to handle the sheer scale of these battles, and many players found themselves frustrated by input lag, crashes, disconnects, and so on. Mythic would work hard to patch and optimize the game post-launch, but these performance issues persisted for much of the game's lifespan. The endgame content, as expected, heavily favored PvP players. Unlike World of Warcraft, which offered a mix of raid content and PvP, Warhammer's endgame revolved almost entirely around city sieges and large-scale RVR battles, and while this was appealing to the more hardcore PvP audience, it also had the side effect of alienating a significant portion of the player base who were more interested in the traditional PvE endgame activities, such as raiding and high-level dungeons. This would create a divide between the player base, with those who preferred PvE content failing to find the kind of polished raiding experience that World of Warcraft offered. Another significant factor contributing to its decline was its lack of consistent and substantial content updates. This was caused largely by the game's rushed launch, as initial patches were primarily focused on addressing the numerous technical issues, which was crucial and necessary, but it also left little room for new content. And while some updates and new content were eventually introduced, they were often too little too late. For example, the Call to Arms expansion, which was released in June of 2009, nearly a year later, added a new high-level zone with PvE and PvP elements, and although it was well received by those remaining, at that point, many players had already left the game for greener pastures. The comparisons to WoW were an ever-present elephant in the room. During this period of stagnation post-launch, WoW continued to dominate the MMORPG space, regularly releasing expansions and content updates that kept players engaged. The Wrath of the Lich King expansion, which launched in November of 2008, that is, a couple months after Warhammer, introduced a wealth of new content, including raids, dungeons, a new class, as well as a steady delivery of major content updates. It was clear WoW's polish and content breadth was hard to match. By the end of 2008, it had already released 2 expansions, which added substantial new features and further solidified its dominance within the MMO market. And though World of Warcraft suffered similar issues to Warhammer at its launch, in 2004, it was released to a relatively niche market with no attractive alternatives. This was a leisure that Warhammer wasn't granted, as disappointed players had a sprawling and active and immensely popular giant awaiting their return. Tensions weren't high with just the player base, but also the development team, even leaking into the public eye. In 2010, an anonymous ex-employee of Mythic Entertainment, going by the pseudonym EA Laos, made waves by posting a scathing blog entry that leaked internal details about the development of Warhammer and criticized EA's handling of the project. The post offered a rare and unfiltered glimpse into the behind-the-scenes struggles at Mythic, and it painted a bleak picture of the game's troubled development, to say the least. According to the post, EA's acquisition of Mythic brought with it unrealistic deadlines, financial constraints, and corporate pressure that stifled the creativity and potential of the game, and went on to claim that EA were more concerned with rushing it out to the market rather than ensuring its long-term success, leading to the release of an obviously unfinished product. The leak garnered significant attention within the community, particularly among those who were already aware of the game's shortcomings. Many saw it as a confirmation of their suspicions of the game's troubled development, and it would become one of the most infamous and scathing leaks in the gaming industry at the time. The controversies seemed to keep coming at this point, as in November of the same year, a glitch in their billing system severely impacted the game's already dwindling reputation. Players discovered that their credit and debit cards had been hit with multiple charges in rapid succession, instead of being billed for their usual monthly subscription fee, which was $15. Some players were charged for several months or even years of subscription fees all at once. In the most extreme cases, they found themselves being billed hundreds or even thousands of dollars in a single day. These unexpected charges caused their bank accounts to be severely overdrafted, leading to bounced payments and overdraft fees. The magnitude of this error varied by player, depending on how long they had been subscribed to the game, or God help them if they had multiple accounts. Once the issue was discovered, Mythic issued a public apology and began working to rectifying the situation. But at this point, the damage had already been done, and the incident sparked outrage among players. many of whom were already disillusioned by the state of the game. For many, this was the final straw, and they canceled their subscriptions immediately after the incident. The charges were all eventually reversed, but not before significant damage had been done to the game's decreasing reputation. As the player base began to decline, the features that the game staked everything on had begun to crumble. Public quests started to lose their appeal as they were designed to be tackled by groups of players, but as server populations dwindled, many of them would be impossible to complete. Without this critical mass of players within the area, the later stages of a player quest, particularly the boss fights, became impossible. But even more destructive was their crown jewel, RVR, which became smaller and smaller and even more imbalanced as outnumbered factions became frustrated and threw in the towel. Contrary to the game's slogan, war was not indeed everywhere. The initial success of Warhammer Online was short-lived. While it launched with a sizable player base, due to these issues, they began to decline quite rapidly within the first few months, and by early 2009, reports indicated that the player base had shrunk to around 300,000, and by the end of that year, the number had dwindled even further, even lower than that of their previous MMO, The Dark Age of Camelot. As its population continued to decline, the imbalance between order and destruction became even more problematic, and as there were now very few newcomers, even with added incentives for outnumbered factions such as increased experience and renown gain, there was little hope for a solution. It wasn't long until Mythic was forced to merge servers in an attempt to consolidate the remaining population and create a healthier environment for RVR battles and such. But alas, the move was seen by many to be just another sign of the game dying. EA, at this point, had begun to play an even more significant role in shaping its trajectory, and as history would show, in the wrong direction. Much like any MMO, the development of Warhammer had been quite costly, and EA expected a return on their investment in the form of strong subscription numbers and sustained revenue. So as the player base began to decline, their willingness to continue investing into the game diminished, and therefore their power over the developers increased. The dev team was gradually downsized since it wasn't making enough money, and of course with fewer developers, that meant fewer updates and expansions. And despite their best efforts to reinvigorate it with patches and new features, it became clear that Warhammer was no longer a priority for EA. The even slower pace of updates frustrated even the most diehard fans, and by 2013, EA made the decision to shut down the game entirely, and on December 18th, their servers were permanently closed, bringing an end to the game's tumultuous 5-year run. After the dust had settled, like many other abandoned MMOs, a phoenix arose from the ashes in the form of emulated servers. The game's most hardcore community refused to let it fade into obscurity, and in the years that followed, a group of passionate players and developers launched private servers to keep it alive at all costs. The most notable of these efforts is Return of Reckoning, which has been running since 2014. They would reverse engineer the game's code, and they rebuilt the server infrastructure to allow players to experience it once again, maintaining much of the game's original content, but also introducing new features and balance changes to address some of the issues that had plagued the official release. Although it was ultimately unsuccessful in sustaining a large player base, its influence in the genre is hard to overstate. Several of its core mechanics, particularly the public quest system, the Tome of Knowledge, and also RVR warfare, left a lasting impact on the genre, and they were adopted by other games in various forms, such as achievements in WoW, fates in Final Fantasy XIV, or dynamic events in Guild Wars 2, to name just a few. The Elder Scrolls Online adopted a similar large-scale faction-based PvP system where players could fight for control of territory. And in general, this idea of territory control where battles have a lasting impact within the game world became a staple of many MMOs and online multiplayer games in the years following its release. It was a game built on bold ideas, to say the least, and if only for a while, it seemed like it might become a major contender within the genre and offering a unique alternative to World of Warcraft. Looking back, Warhammer Online represents both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration for MMO developers. It serves as a reminder of the importance of balancing ambition with practicality, and for those who experience the highs and lows of the game, it'll always hold a special place in the history of online gaming. An interesting experiment that, while flawed, paved the way for future innovations within the genre. And it seems that the story of Warhammer within the MMO world is not over, as in 2023, a developer named Jackalyptic Games announced the development of an upcoming Warhammer MMO. Not much else is really known at this moment in time, but past and new fans alike are currently awaiting in eager anticipation for details on a possible redemption. As the MMO landscape continues to evolve, Warhammer Online's legacy endures as a symbol of both the challenges and the potential of large-scale faction-based warfare in online games. The lessons learned from its development, rise, and decline will undoubtedly continue to shape the future of the genre for years to come. Thanks for watching my video. This is a possible new series if you guys enjoyed it. The idea is to go over other MMOs or video games that have been shut down and covering their development, rise and fall in a historical and analytical way. I'm sure there's room for improvement, so let me know if you have any suggestions or if you have a game that you would like to see covered. And aside from that, don't forget to like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, folks. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.